Γεια σας, χαίρομαι που ήρθατε για αυτό το masterclass με τον Laverty. Ξέρετε ότι έχει συνεργαστεί σε πάρα πολλές ταινίες με τον Ken Loach. Είναι ταινίες που και τους δυο ενδιαφέρουν αυτά τα θέματα, ασχολούνται με την ανεργία, με τα κοινωνικά προβλήματα, με τη μετανάστευση, τη γραφειοκρατία, τον πόλεμο, σε μια σειρά ταινίες που φαντάζομαι οι περισσότεροι να τις έχετε δει. Η τελευταία ταινία που θα προβληθεί απόψε είναι η καινούρια ταινία που είχε προβληθεί στις Κάνες. Είναι μια ταινία που ασχολείται με ένα pub σε μια κομμόπολη βόρεια, όπου μέχρι τότε δεν ήξεραν ούτε για μετανάστες, ήταν μια κλειστή κοινωνία, και όπου εκεί στο τέλος όμως, δηλαδή είναι άνθρωποι που ενδιαφέρονται για τον συνάνθρωπό τους, αρχίζουν να μαζεύονται πέρα από το να πιούν μια μπύρα που έχει κάπως ξεπεραστεί, και είναι μια πόλη όπου ήταν παλιότερα υπήρχαν τα ορυχεία εκεί κοντά και είχαν κλείσει, που ξέρουμε εξαιτίας διαφόρων νόμων που πέρασαν και χάσαν τις δουλειές τους και έκλεισαν πολλά ορυχεία στην Αγγλία. Υπάρχει και ιστορία μέσα στο pub των μεταλλορύχων, των αγώνων τους, των απεργιών που έκαναν, το συγκρούσιο με την αστυνομία. Υπάρχει ένα δεύτερο δωμάτιο που είναι το κλειστό, το μυστικό δωμάτιο, και παίζονται σε αυτά τα δύο δωμάτια, παίζεται η ιστορία όπου αρχίζουν να έρχονται Σύριοι μετανάστες και οι άνθρωποι της πόλης αυτής θέλουν να τους βοηθήσουν. Μια μερίδα, μια άλλη μερίδα δεν θέλει μετανάστες, λέει αυτοί έρχονται να μας βάλουν τις δουλειές μας, να παίρνουν επιδόματα, που εδώ είμαστε άνεργοι κλπ. Και υπάρχει αυτή η σύγκρουση και δείχνει ακριβώς αυτό το πρόβλημα και πώς μπορούμε να αντιμετωπίσουμε αυτό το πρόβλημα με ανθρωπιά και την αίσθηση ότι πώς να φερόμαστε στους συνανθρώπους μας και ότι είναι εισβολείς που έρθουν να μας φάνε τα λεφτά μας, στις δουλειές μας κλπ. Λοιπόν, αυτό το θέμα εμφανίζεται με διαφορετικούς τρόπους και στις άλλες ταινίες. Το masterclass αυτό θα γίνει στα αγγλικά, όπως είχε γίνει και το προηγούμενο με τον Κουστορίτσα. Ελπίζω όλοι να μιλάτε αγγλικά και να μην χρειαστεί να γίνει μετάφραση. Λοιπόν, θα ξεκινήσω. Εντάξει, έχουμε πρόβλημα για τη μετάφραση? Όχι, no. So we're going to have the masterclass in English, no everybody understands. Okay, so σας παρουσιάζω τον Laverty, τον είδατε, ο οποίος θα ήθελα να ξεκινήσω. My first question is, how did this connection start with Paul? Did you know him beforehand, or did he first search out for you? How did the link come about?
First of all, before I answer that, just an enormous pleasure to be here and to be with my wonderful old friend Ninos, who's been a solid compañero for many, many years. So thanks for the invitation, Ninos. Lovely to be here. And I'm very sorry I can't do this in Greece. In fact, some people might say it's a pity I can't do it in English with my Scottish accent. And I keep telling people, if they call it a masterclass, I'm not going to turn up. I really mean that, because it's not a masterclass, it's a conversation and an exchange. And if I knew what I was talking about with great authority, like a surgeon or a 7th Dan karate expert, you might call it a masterclass. Most of the time, it's a state of confusion. If you're making a film, at least it is for me. And also, before I answer the last question too, isn't it a sad day when Henry Kissinger kicks the bucket at last?
We're crying
It's a happy day.
Yes, did that not put me in a good mood this morning? You know, when
I think he should have died there much earlier.
Yes, yes. If he died 70 years earlier, there'd be several million more people alive today. But it's remarkable, isn't it, how mass murderers are turned into these heroes. And always remember a very particular connection with Chile. I mean, you could pick any place around the world where he murdered and killed and lied, but in Chile in particular, we remember. We had a lovely friend, Vladimir, who was actually a Chilean musician, and he fled Britain. We did a little film about him, Ninos, the 11th of September film. It used to be on YouTube. It's worth seeing. If you get a chance to have a look it up, just look up Ken Loach, 11th September. It's an 11-minute film. But what's beautiful about it is the archive footage of the Chileans after the coup. And always remember, Kissinger was told about the torture and murder. think it was actually by the British ambassador. And no, his American, his own ambassador. And he said, cut out the human rights lectures. Cut out the human rights lectures. I mean, remarkable. I mean, this man has blood in his hands all the way from Cambodia to Vietnam. He turned a blind eye to the mass murder in Indonesia. But it's incredible, if you watch the BBC News or the news today, just how he'll be lionised as the great intellectual statesman. And there was also something else he said that was very, very interesting. I had a wonderful friend called Howard Zinn who wrote the beautiful book called The People's History of the United States. And if any of you youngsters want to get a good idea of how America works, it's a great starting point, The People's History of the United States. Now, Howard talks about Kissinger saying that history is the memory of states. In other words, the official history, their narrative. And Howard always said, no, history is the history of the people. You know, so he was a grand liar, he's a mass murderer, and he'll be dancing a jig in hell tonight with Pinochet, with Ronnie Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. And I'm going to have a whiskey.
He was also partly responsible for the invasion of Turkey in Cyprus, because he stopped the Greek fleet from stopping the Turkish fleet and told them, no, they are not invading, they are just exercising outside in the Aegean. Don't worry, there won't be any invasion. And he had arranged with the Turks to continue and invade.
What was your question again?
Yeah, the question is how...
I'm only joking. I haven't got dementia yet, but it's on the way. Yes, well, I met Ken, I was working in Nicaragua many years ago for a human rights organisation, and I suppose I was an eyewitness to the systematic torture and murder of civilians in Nicaragua. The Sandinista revolution in 1979, many of you weren't even born then, I'm sure, but very briefly, there was a revolution in 1979. They overthrew a corrupt dictatorship called Somoza. And anyway, to cut a very long story short, only a population of 3 million people. And they did remarkable things at the beginning. They taught the population to read and write. They said we can't have a functioning progressive state if we don't have our population to read and write. So they organised through students, pyramids, organisation, people got into the community, into the countryside and taught their population to read and write. They wiped out polio. They did amazing things, just the basics that you would do for any decent society. And anyway, to cut a long story short, the United States funded the Contra, who were the counter-revolutionaries, who the people were kicked out in the revolution. And they, over a 10-year period, they just tore Nicaragua apart. And so, for our generation, going to Nicaragua was a wee bit like the Spanish International Brigade. So lots of people went there to try and support the Sandinista revolution. Many of my friends did useful things like they were doctors and nurses, and I ended up working for a human rights organisation. And so I kind of saw the systematic torture and murder across the country dismantled, diplomatic initiatives like cutting off loans to the IMF and the World Bank. So I kind of saw the entire destruction in a very systematic fashion. And in my innocence, when I came back, I said, I'm going to try and make a film about this. I was sick of writing human rights reports, sick of doing, press releases, sick of talking to journalists. And in my innocence, I said, I'm going to make a film about this. So I wrote to lots of people, and most people didn't write back, as you may expect, since I hadn't written a screenplay. There was a war on. There was no film industry. But Ken got in contact with me, and we met for a cup of tea. And what was lovely about him, for the very beginning, Ninos, was he was just curious about what I'd seen and what I had to say. He didn't care about reputations, he didn't care. He said it'd be a very long shot. He couldn't speak Spanish. The war was still going on. But he said, why don't you try and write a few scenes? Is there any writers here you've been asked to do treatments? Has anybody been asked to do treatments? Oh, my commiserations, how miserable. Well, because that's what often happens. People ask to do treatments. What you're going to do. I'm going to make a film about such and such. It will deal with the following subject. This will be the premise. Da 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 da. And it's a miserable thing to write, and it's hard to make it live. But if you write a scene, you can make it live. And I didn't know if I could write a scene. But he said, go home and try and write some scenes, because I'd written the treatment. I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to try and achieve. But what you try to achieve is different from the living, breathing script. And so I went back home, I I wrote the first half of Carla's song and sent it to him. And I think he was more surprised than I was. And I was pretty surprised. But there was that kind of sense of just something coming to life in your hands. So I think that's the secret if you are trying to write. It just somehow has to have its own life, and you have to feel that tingle of excitement when you try to do it. So after Ken got that, I think he thought, well, maybe this person can write. And but it took 5 years from then into getting the film made, because he had other stories ahead with other wonderful writers, Jim Allen in particular. And we did Land and Freedom. Jim Allen is a Manchester writer. Anyway, we got a chance, so when we made that first film, you know, we became very close friends because politically we were connected, we were doing all sorts of activities and, you know, activist stuff. But that was the first connection. And then after we did the song, the Carla song in Nicaragua, Ken had already been away from home for about 2 years because he did Land and Freedom in Spain before that. And I had already written another script in Los Angeles which we made called Bread and Roses, about cleaners in Los Angeles. But he said to me, everybody gets sick in Nicaragua apart from me. I had all the bugs from previous times. And he just says, oh, for Christ's sake, can you not write something in Glasgow, someplace close, you know? And that's all he said. And then I went away, and that became My Name is Joe, which I think you covered when you were in Cannes. And Peter Mullen, a wonderful actor, Glaswegian actor, ended up winning the best prize for actor in Cannes. So sometimes it's one story leads into another. I didn't mean to answer that so long. But,
So actually with Carla's song, you already dealt for the first time in Ken's films with immigration, although it had to do with Nicaragua there. And in the next one was about unemployment. My Name is Joe. So these were problems that we were all worried about, and we had to deal with it, not only in Nicaragua or not only in Britain, but in Europe, in the whole of Europe and Greece. But how did you, I mean, what kind of research did you do, for example, for immigrants, and what kind of the unemployment in England, I mean, what before writing the script?
Well, I suppose Bread and Roses, not directly, I don't know if you've seen that film. It's basically, for people who haven't seen it, it's a story about people who come up from Central America, El Salvador, Guatemala, DF, Mexico City, and all of these places. And they've gone on this odyssey. They've come up to California. And what they did was, they were remarkable people, really. So they were undocumented. So that meant that they were paid crap wages. They couldn't get any health insurance, which meant they had no health coverage for their families. And they also had 3 jobs to live. And so they were very, very exposed, very exploited. Their children were joining gangs, so they're never at home because they're working all the time. And so I met these people when I was in Los Angeles at the time. I ended up there by a sort of an accident. And anyway, so I met these people, and they were remarkable people. And but what they were doing was looking for volunteers to join a campaign called Justice for Janitors. And the idea was that it would be a community, not just a union, against these big organisations who organise all the cleaners in the downtown tower blocks and the banks and the richest agencies. And they were very, very imaginative. And so what they did was they got the bus users union, the churches, grassroots, students. I'd actually won a Fulbright award to go there. And so and it was a film school in California, which was incredibly boring. So these people were much more exciting, and I learned so much more from them. So I joined in with them, and what they would do is they would target they would target key individuals who were responsible for the decisions making their lives miserable. So they would, you know, burst into a restaurant, you know, and say, what is it like having that lovely big, you know, fried lobster, you know, while we're on this miserable wage, or outside their homes, or outside their communities. So they kind of declared war in a peaceful way. And they were very, very agile and terrific. And I just thought this would be a great film to make, you know, because it really was, it goes right to the heart of capital and also exploited labour. So there's something just really kind of atavistic, basic about it, and all these amazing stories. So you asked me a question. It was by being with them, living with them. I went to live downtown Los Angeles, which was a crazy area. In the 30s it used to be very beautiful. Then it was run by gangs, and that's where many Filipinos lived, because it was cheap housing. So just by being with them and living with them, it gives you the ammunition to try and write the story very truthfully. And also went down to Juarez, Ciudad Juarez, down to the Mexican border. You see where all these people have come up from South America to work along the maquila factories. And when you see them, you understand the choices, the lives, the brutality. You saw many, many young people drifting into prostitution, and so what you saw was just mass exploitation. But if you've been to these places and spoken to them, and you've looked them in the eye, when you come to write something, although it's fictional, it gives you gives you the energy and the confidence to write about people outside your own experience. I know that's become a big, big issue now, but from the very beginning, we've always felt that if you don't listen to people, don't put yourself in their shoes, you can't really write about it, even if it's fictional characters. So all that research was very, very important. And when I did that, obviously, when Ken comes on board later on, introduce him to these people, so he understands that world and meets the people. And then we come to do the casting, we often find people who have lived that world, so they feed into the story too. So it becomes kind of organic, from the idea, the research, the script, story development, meeting people, and also the casting. Because Ken has always said, what we try to do is we try and find people who give best life, flesh and blood to the characters as imagined in the screenplay. Now sometimes that might be a very well-known actor, like Cillian Murphy in The Wind That Shakes the Barley. Or it might be somebody like Paul Brannigan, who's called Angel Shear, who I met, who had just come out of prison. He'd never acted in his life before. So I've always loved Ken's brass neck and courage to make very radical choices. And that's the good thing. If you keep the budget low, then we keep control of the project, and that's always been paramount for us.
What brought about the decision to make a film about, say, teenagers in
Sweet 16?
Yes, Sweet 16, and also interracial relationships in Fond Kiss, for example.
Yeah, these are all kind of really interesting questions too, because we always feel that the why of the story is the most important question ever. Why this story? Because we can make stories about anything, can't we? But why this one? And so I think, for people who are making films here, that question is absolutely fundamental, because not only is it investment of all of your time, sometimes that can be 4 or 5, in one case 10 years, not working on it all the time, but it can be a life obsession. So trying to think of why you're doing it is really, really, really important. And with Sweet 16, I've always loved the energy of young people. There's something kind of just vivacious and remarkable about it. So when little Liam in the film, I don't know if you've seen the film Sweet 16, but it's about a youngster who turns 16. But so there's a kind of an energy about them that I've always found very, very attractive. There's a madness to youth, isn't there? The decisions they make, and there's sometimes a fearlessness, at least with some characters. So that's what was very attractive for me to write for Sweet 16. But also, when you look at people's future when they're 16, it raises all sorts of questions about the society they live in. What options have they got? And so Ken and myself were very interested in the options that young people had in the west coast of Scotland, in a post-industrial area like Greenock, where they used to build ships and steel and coal. What choices were left to them? And so although we told quite a dynamic story there, I hope, underneath it are all these big questions about, how do we live a life? How do people find work? How do they find meaningful work? How do you build community? So a lot of these questions are under the surface like a great big iceberg. But you have the story and the narrative on the top. So that was attractive. And then for A Fond Kiss, that was a story about a Catholic school teacher and an Asian Muslim Glaswegian lad, and they have a relationship. and it's how he divided the families. And that came out of all the, after the 9/11 attack, the 11 September attack in New York. And what we found absolutely incredible was that young Muslims in my city in Glasgow were being attacked in the street because of something that happened in New York. That was the starting point. I said, well, how bonkers is that? I mean, what of the Muslims in my city, who we got on well with? Why are they being attacked in the street in Glasgow? And that was the spark, and then we started looking at just the stereotypes and the viciousness, and we tried to tell a little love story, because sometimes you don't want to repeat yourself, you want to try and find a new way and to touch into these. So for every single story there's been a different impulse. Sometimes it's an accident. I don't know if you saw a little film we did called Looking for Eric, about Eric Cantona, he was a wonderful footballer for Manchester United, and he came to see us about a story he wanted us to tell. It was about a fan who followed him from Leeds United to Manchester, and I mean, I couldn't write it and I wasn't interested, but was fascinated by Cantona because he was a big giant character. He was, again, for many of the younger people here, you won't know who he was, but in those days he was the superstar of football. Played for Manchester United. They won the league for the first time after 20 years. And he was French, and he was sexy, and he was funny. Everything that most footballers aren't, at least in Scotland. And don't know about Greece. And he was a funny man. And in that moment, I just had a little idea when I saw him, because he fulfilled every bit of talent he had on the football pitch. You could see him.
First comedy, that was a comedy, basically.
Yeah, I suppose it was. Yeah. It made us laugh. I don't know if it made anybody else laugh. Yeah, but sometimes after doing tragedies, it's nice to think. I think there's moments of fun in most of our films, I hope. Even in Sweet 16, My Name is Joe, there's a kind. I mean, that's our experience of life, and working class life. People are not, uniformly miserable, exploited. If you just talk about the misery all the time, you wouldn't have a story. So there's always a roundness to characters, isn't there? And oftentimes they're very, very funny. When I see stories of working class people who are always miserable, always long-faced, always ready to commit suicide, that's not my experience of them. There is that experience, but there's also great life, great vitality. They take the piss, they laugh, they joke, and that was just felt natural to these characters.
Something more, or shall I ask you another question?
Fire away.
Okay. So, I mean, yes, you've dealt with, as I said, immigrants, unemployment, topical problems. But once you turn to a historical type, with the wind blows in the Barley,
Shakes the Barley, yeah.
And there you must have needed a lot of research to go back to Ireland in that period, and also make a film that is, and at the end is a kind of anti-war film, not?
Yeah, well, that was a massive challenge, Ninos. Can you hear me okay, or is it echoing? Are you okay? Am I speaking too fast for people who are not?
Yes, a little bit slower because of the pronunciation.
It's slower.
I bet it's slow. I'll try. But then I'll forget. And then you can just put your hand up and say, slow down again, mate, slow down. So I'll try and do that. The Wind That Shakes the Barley was a remarkable project to try and get your head round. And Ken and myself had been interested in Ireland for a long, long time. It was Britain's first colony, I suppose, and it bled into still what is a terrible conflict in the north of Ireland. There's no longer ostensible violence there, but the shadow of those decisions is very deep in the UK. And so we wanted to try and make a film about Ireland, the War of Independence in 1919, and the Civil War that bled into the Civil War in 1921. Now, history is often deeply contested. So to try and get your head around it all is a massive challenge, because we knew everybody would be breathing down our neck and watching us. So you really have to dig in, and also what was different this time as well, most of the people who were the protagonists were dead. At least that's what I thought until very late on. And so we thought that the flying columns of these young people fighting against the British Army and the soldiers would be for a very, very dynamic backdrop to the window shades of Barley. And what was remarkable was just to go to these places, walk round where the ambushes took place. And I was there in February and March in Ireland, and it was so cold, it was so wet, it was so miserable. And I realised then that if you were going to be a guerrilla and take on an occupying army, you have to be young. You know, so it was going to be a young person's film. And if it's a young person's film, oftentimes the way people make political decisions can be very brutal as well. It can be very like hard, very, very, very tough, very kind of from the gut. And that was very, very important for me to do that. And the research too was very important, to go to the museums and see the photographs of the faces, to go to the libraries, you know, and find the letters, to listen to their songs, you know, and to just try and get into the shoes of those people. And what was very important too was that women were virtually written out of Republican history. And for us that was very, very important that the role of women, especially in a guerrilla war, was recognised. You know, from the grandmother to the main actress that we had. They passed messages, they had guns, they passed information. So their contribution, especially in a guerrilla war, was absolutely key to the fight against the British occupation. So we wanted to do that too. But and then we made a key decision, because what I didn't want was to be lumbered with the detail of every person's life in this story, because there's famous characters and everybody knows the dates. This happened the 24th of October, such and such. So we made them all fictional characters, but inspired by those times. And then that liberated us to tell the story that we wanted to do, a truthful story, I hope. And then the next great challenge, Ninos, was the War of Independence was massively complicated. And then that bled into the Civil War. So it felt almost like you could have two films. But we only thought we'd only ever get one chance at it. And so to write a script that's got many, many voices and many, many characters is much more complicated, because you've only got a little bit of time with them. So what you have to do is try to suggest the iceberg underneath each character again. Someone who's a farm labourer is different from someone who is the son of a farmer who owns his own land. They've all got different perspectives, different shapes, and that affected their political opinions when it came to the truce and what type of Ireland they were fighting for. And so it was a massive challenge to try and fit everything into one film. So it was a great relief when we did get the film out, and it was, and fortunately it was very well received. And the British, of course, went absolutely crazy when they won the Palme d'Or. That was very, very funny. That was very funny to see that. They all attacked Ken for being Leni Riefenstahl propagandist. They said, why do these people hate their own country? And what was really remarkable about it was, again, this goes back to Kissinger, how they always want to take control of the narrative. And there's a guy called Michael Gove, who's now a very influential position in government. You know, he's a real opportunist. He's very articulate, but he's a tremendous liar. And what he said, he wrote afterwards, he said, the trouble with the Republican movement is they always had a peaceful path, but chose the violent path. I'm paraphrasing what he said. And our film did the exact opposite. Because what we showed was in 1918, Sinn Féin, the Irish party, they won the election. There was a political and diplomatic and a democratic vote to end the British occupation. And then when when Ireland asked Britain to respect that democratic decision, when the majority of the population voted for them to leave, what did they do? They crushed it violently. And that's why they attacked the film so much. And again, this is why, when we look at the response to Henry Kissinger today, we see how these states try to grasp the narrative to justify their violence and their murder. And we see it most clearly today, of course, with Israel, you know, and the Palestinians. I mean, there's just, I've got a very good friend here who is an activist, Frank, there at the bottom. He's been helping me with understand this problem for many, many years, but the more you look at it again, you see how they try to grasp the narrative to justify their violence and their systematic violence. So it happens again, and it happens in most stories, really, isn't it? How you try to gain the narrative. Daniel Blake, what was the narrative there? People on welfare are scroungers. Grand narrative. There were opinion polls published, something like ordinary people thought that 30% of the welfare budget in the UK was fraudulently claimed. I don't know if you've seen the film like Daniel Blake's, but an old guy who signs on. I mean, people thought 30% of the welfare budget was fraudulently claimed. The reality is 0.02%, less than half of 1%. But everybody believed this, so that was the justification for this violence on the welfare system. So it's very, very interesting as writers or as filmmakers to try and get your head around what is the grand narrative, what is the truth underneath. And the way to get to truth underneath, of course, is to do the hard graft, the journalistic work that we did in, I, Daniel Blake, to understand what was going on under the surface. Then in a way you've got to forget it, and then you've got to be liberated by the characters to try and tell that story as concisely as possible. And that makes it sound like it's quite simple, but it's always a struggle. It's always a state of confusion, and it's very seldom masterful. So there you go.
Whose idea was it to write the script for Angel's Share? It's about whiskey, which is one of the funniest, enjoyable films. But you also show there are some real characters with their personal problems within the story.
Yeah, the thing is, Ken and myself will be working hand in hand for all these 30 years now, but we do very different jobs, and that's the secret. Apart from, being, you have to share kind of the deep values, otherwise you would never make these films. You have to share something like that. But we do very different jobs. I'm a writer, he's a director, but we meet in the middle as filmmakers. So we do different jobs. So it's the screenwriter's job to come up with these ideas, and then to examine them, to put pressure on them to see if they work. And I always thought that a group of youngsters, again, who were on community service. I don't know if you have this in Greece. So instead of sending young people to prison, what you do is you make them do community service. Like clean the streets and clean graffiti, and that means there's a gang, there's a group of them, and that's always fun to write, But again, we wanted to look at their options. What options do they have? The young character in this, he wants to look after his child, but because he's deemed to be a loser, nobody believes in him, especially his father-in-law. He's more and more marginalised. And then we tell this little tale of someone trying to look after his child. But he wants, like everybody has, he wants the things that we want from time immemorial. He wants shelter, he wants a house, he wants to be able to look after someone he loves, and he wants to look after his child. So it's as old as the hills, but we wrap it around a history, a whiskey heist. And it was a lot of fun to write, and of course you must know that Ninos here is a great whiskey fan. Last time I was here, we drank far too much Lagavulin. I now call him Mr. Lagavulin. He enjoys his whiskey very, very much, and so maybe that's why we got a good review. I bet you didn't like the story, but you liked the whiskey. Yeah.
I like both. When I saw the new film, The Old Dog, it reminded me a bit of Jimmy's Hall, because there is a hall also where people gather. There, of course, the problems are different in Jimmy's Hall than the problems that you have in the new film. Can you say something about Jimmy's Hall?
Yeah, Jimmy's Hall. And it's interesting too, because we made Jimmy's Hall after The Wind That Shakes the Barley. And in The Wind That Shakes the Barley, there was a line I always liked from the British landowner, who said, if you people, he's talking about the Republicans, he says, if you people win, Ireland will be nothing but a priest-infested backwater. Is that slow enough? And a priest...
It is slow enough.
Thank you. A priest-infested backwater. And that's what Ireland, in a way, became. And there's something interesting about this. I'm jumping. But try and fall in love with the antagonists in your film, the people you don't like. You know, give them the best lines, and they often steal the best lines anyway. And it's ironic that this British landlord actually put his finger on it, because what happened in the Civil War, the radicals were divided from the more conservative people who didn't. They wanted the same sort of power and system, but with Irish accents. They weren't looking for a radical change. So the church became massively important, became very, very conservative, and it did become a place where conscience and liberty was crushed. And so when we were very interested in Jimmy's Hall again, and it seemed to be such a lovely, beautiful premise, and this idea that everyone needs a safe space, a place to meet where they can think freely, where they can dance, where they can educate themselves. But when people do that, they're seen as a threat to the system. And so it felt like a tiny little story. Jimmy's Hall, it was going to be built by Jimmy Gralton, who came back from the United States with his own money and with his own friends. And they built this hall, you know, in Ireland in the 20s and 30s. And it was going to be a free space where they could give their own classes, they could do history lessons, and they could do dance, music, everything, but not under the control of the church and the state. And that's what drove the church and the state crazy. So this little hall was destroyed. And it struck us that, I remember actually, when we were writing that, I remember there was an incident here in Greece, remember, the young lad who was a rapper, you know, who was chased by Golden Dawn, and he was murdered in the streets here.
Pablos Fisas.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, that really struck me there too, that people couldn't express themselves, they couldn't sing songs, they couldn't do their stuff, but they were seen as a threat. Or, you know, look at China, Wai Weiwei was just kicked out of China because of his art. And what was remarkable about that little story was, it was just, I think we wanted to look at how activists nourish each other too. You know, because when you look at the misery around us, how do you keep your hope up? How do you live? You know, how do you keep on having that energy to fight back? And what I loved about Jimmy's Hall was, once you start something, it brings other people in, and people gain confidence, and people learn, and people organise, and people take the next step. And we wanted to just to see how much fun and nutrition you get from that, you know. And I've learned that from the activists I've worked with, you know. Often brilliant people, they do the hard work and the graft, but there's a hinterland to them. You know, great fun to be with them. You know, you're not only you do try to do the work, but you're actually nourished, and it fulfills your life. And I've always found that. And so, as we found, we wanted to do a little story with Jimmy's Hall that would do that. Ultimately, it was crushed, but we had to be truthful. But we also felt that there was going to be an echo of Jimmy's Hall ever. And even today, they still go along there. They still dance on that site. They commemorate it and they remember it. You know, so the spirit of Jimmy's Hall and that sense of fun and vitality was a lovely story to do. And Ken did a brilliant job with the casting and the musicians, if you get a chance to see it. And to see people dancing and singing, it's not a bad thing for the soul these days, is it really?
Something that was before this, when you were talking about the other film about Ireland, you said that everybody is dead, but you found out that it's not. Was there a problem with the one who survived?
Oh, that's a crazy story, because, you know, this was when did we do the Sheets of Barley? So it's not 20 years ago. But anyway, I was always trying to find if I could even just meet one person who'd been a young person in the flying columns of the 1920s. And anyway, I'd heard there might be one left, and I just couldn't find him anywhere. But I spoke to a lot of people who had, you know, children and grandchildren of people of the flying column. And So that was very rich because they told great stories. But then what was amazing, Ninos, was the day we showed the film in Cork, this old man, he was about 100, and he turned up with his granddaughter on a bus, all right? And he came up and this is the guy I'd heard might still be alive. And anyway, to cut a long story short, he came along to the opening, you know, and he was deeply moved by the film, and it was marvellous. But afterwards there was a cocktail party, and not cocktail party, you know those little drinks, and you have these, you know, onions and tomatoes on a little stick like that, you know. This guy had survived God knows what, you know, during the War of Independence, the Civil War. I think he was active in England too. They were chasing him there. And anyway, his eyesight wasn't the best, and he picked up a cocktail stick with all the little things, and he tried to swallow it. And it nearly got stuck in his throat. And his granddaughter actually just put her hand in and managed to fish it all out. And I thought that was almost a disaster. This man had been in the War of Independence. He'd survived decades. And then he fucking choked, you know, on the opening night of The Wind That Shakes the Barley. And I felt a cold sweat, you know, on my brow. So I only met him once, but I'll never forget it. Yeah.
Can you say something about the new film, The Old Oak? Now, there is a pub similar, not called maybe The Old Oak, yes, that you inspired you, or it was just an idea to have a place again where people can meet, and then you have also the controversies?
Yes. I don't. Is anybody going to see the? You won't have seen it yet. Nobody's seen it.
We have.
You have seen it.
In Thessaloniki.
Oh,
yes. Some have seen it. Some have seen it in Cannes.
Oh,
some will see it tonight. I hope.
Oh well. I hate to do spoilers. I'll give you the background to the story without trying to destroy the story. But we did I, Daniel Blake, and Sorry We Missed You, which is about the gig economy in the northeast of England. Those are those two films. And then after that, Ken was into his 80s by that time. And to make a film, especially the way Ken does it, takes great energy, you know, because it's a long casting process, and he just wondered, I mean, intellectually he's as sharp as ever, you know, wonderfully sharp and bright and funny. But he's getting more fragile physically. And also, it takes great energy to do this over many, many months. The casting for, you know, The Old Oak took about 6 months. We had to find a community of Syrians, we had to find communities of the host community in England. So it took some time to decide whether we would actually try and do another one. Anyway, I think as he rested up after those other two films, I said, well, let's have a crack at it. And I, Daniel Blake, and Sorry I Missed You, I mean, they're both tragedies in their own way. Daniel Blake's about an older man who's crushed for the state, and Chris and his family, and Sorry I Missed You. You see what happens with the gig economy. People working 12 to 14 hours a day, self-exploiting themselves, thinking they're free. But we also felt there was unfinished business. And we also thought that if this was going to be Ken's last film, we wanted to look at the notion of hope, where it comes from, how we find it, how we nourish each other, and that was the kind of the sense that we had. But we didn't know what the story would be. So I said, well, if you're up for it, I'll go back up to the northeast of England, I'll dig around, speak to people. And that's what I often do, just to start listening, talking, trying to make connections. So we went back up to these communities, and in these little villages, they're quite remarkable really now, because you can actually see the history of post-industrialism. You know, this is where the mines were, this is where the miners lived, little terraced houses. Most of the towns are closed up now, the state retracts, the post office gone, the bank gone, the swimming pool gone, the library gone, you know, some churches gone, church halls all gone. And then what's happened, because the housing was so cheap, what people were doing was sending down in England from, you know, richer areas. they would send their problem families up there. You know, families who are addicted, or you know, or had other difficulties, or people returning from prison. So the people who lived there suddenly were having all these people around them with tremendous social problems. You know, people returned from prison, people who were addicts, people who were out, you know, talked to one poor old miner, someone living next door to him, you know, they just made noise all night, tried to burn the curtains of their own house down. I mean, caused chaos in their lives. And then what I found out was that this is where the Syrian refugees were being put as well. So the people who lived there were furious. And I could understand why, because nobody ever listened to them and said, well, why don't you send them to Westminster? Why don't you send them to, you know, Chelsea? Areas where they've got resources, you've got nothing, and then you get this as well. And so you could see where racism and the roots of racism could really grow, and that's what the far right looks at. But we also found great people there, just locals, who held out the hand of friendship to the Syrians, but also understood where the anger was and tried to disentangle it all. So this is a little story set in a pub called the Old Oak, and the Old Oak in England is, you know, there's lots of pubs called that, and the Old Oak is a symbol of England, and it's in a, and you know, traditionally it was seen as the, you know, the symbol of strength and wisdom. But our Old Oak pub is hanging on to life by its fingertips, and so it's the last public space in this little village, so it becomes contested territory. So it's a little tale that deals with many of these elements. People who have fled war, people post-industrial UK. So it's an enormous canvas, big canvas. It's a tiny little story that unfolds in a pub called the Old Oak. So it was a challenge to do, and it's great to get it out. And unfortunately, I wrote this script 4 years ago, but many of the issues, you know, of racism, and again, who gets hold of the microphone, who's got the narrative, become more and more obvious by the day. We've had terrible problems with our politicians in the UK. They've just fired the Home Secretary. She was called Sue Ella Braverman, and she was an out and out racist. You know, you'd find people in the communities trying to work with people and trying to understand them, but the people who had the microphone like her, you know, were talking about, and the boat people being an existential threat to the UK. They talked about being invaded, all this kind of very, very rough rhetorical language, which I think we see, you know, in many parts of the world, don't we?
So besides the scripts that you've written for Ken Loach, you also did some for Icíar Bollaín, the Tambien La Lluvia, and Kathmandu. How was that for you?
Yes, well, Icíar, yeah, we've made 3 films together. Kathmandu, I didn't really have anything to do with that. I just helped a little bit with clumsy dialogue because it was translated into English. So I didn't really have anything to do with that one, to be honest. But the other way, we did a film in Bolivia, Tambien La Lluvia. We did a film in Cuba called Yuli, about a Cuban ballet dancer. And we also did a lovely little film called The Olive Tree in Spain.
I guess.
Yeah, which was great fun to do. And again, you know, every relationship was different with, you know, a director or a writer. But generally speaking, we worked in the same way. Icíar likes to keep the budget low, so we can keep control of the subject matter, very important to her too. Her work with actors, very, very similar to Ken. And Icíar used to be an actress herself, and she was acted in the film Land of Freedom, so she saw how Ken operated. But she's picked up stuff from, you know, many other directors in Spain, and but the approach is very, very similar. And I mean, in many ways, again, if you meet in the middle as filmmakers, you know, so working with Ken or Icíar, what's been brilliant about both of them, no big egos. You just try to be your own toughest critics to the subject matter, and our loyalty is to the script, not to the script, to the film. And so sometimes something in the script might not work, so you have to change it. And particularly with Tambien La Lluvia, it's a very, very complicated film to do. We shot it in Bolivia, and in essence, what we're trying to do is cover two time periods: present day, contemporary Bolivia. Well, it was 1990, so it was periods which made it very difficult for them. And what happened when the colonialists arrived 500 years ago? and that meant like going out into the jungle, people getting their kit off. The detail is, the devil's always in the detail. So to direct scenes in the jungle during rainy seasons with lots of people dressed up as the indigenous populations is a massive challenge. So what we had to do was just reduce scenes, try to reimagine scenes, and try to make it simpler. But that limitation, oftentimes for young film writers or filmmakers, sometimes the limitations can force you to be more original. They can become your friend and not your enemy. And so we couldn't have Columbus arriving in boats. So we actually had it replayed in a hotel with waiters, and it actually turned out to be funny. It had an extra power because it was unusual. So instead of spending millions on a big scene like that, you could do it simply in an afternoon, because it was people's imagination. It was people doing a read-through of a script, people who were trying to make a film about what was happening then. So the whole thing became kind of screwed through a different lens. And so it was great working with Icíar. She was very, very sharp and quick on her feet. And it's always the same process of, when you're confronted with problems, you try to solve them quickly, you try to solve them with openly and in a transparent fashion. And so the process is always the same, and I've been very lucky to work with both of them.
Thank you very much. Now we have some questions from the audience.
First of all, congratulations for this nice. Okay. First of all, congratulations for these nice films that you made all these years, and you have shown us how crucial it is to keep our humanity in these difficult times. I would like to ask you if you could tell us something more about the way you work with Ken Loach. I mean, have you finished the first draft and after that you discuss, or scene by scene you are building up the script? If you can tell us something more. Thank you very much.
Are you a writer?
Yes.
It's a good question. Good question. What usually happens is the processes can be often very organic. When I've told you sometimes the seed for a film might be, I was in Nicaragua or I was in Bread and Roses in Los Angeles. Sometimes it's like Eric Cantona coming, and he presents us with an opportunity that leads us to think of something else. The thing is, if you are lucky enough, and I think this is the beautiful thing about filmmakers, if you can form a tight little circle of good friends that you trust, share your values, they've got different skill sets, it's a beautiful way to work. And I've been so lucky, because I want to mention my wonderful friend Rebecca O'Brien, who's our producer. And again, often women are put in the background and not recognised. She's allowed us to work all these years, and she's in the background, very, very humble and very, very good at her job. So we always think of it as a group. And but we're very close friends, all three of us. We've all got different jobs. Me and Ken are in contact all the time about everything from politics to film to football to, everything, gossip, And the good thing about that is then things evolve organically, things that drive us crazy. Some things, and what I've noticed over the years is we've got an instinct for the same type of, we probably get angry at the same things, probably get really upset at the same things. So there's a kind of a synchronicity, between us. So when we have a feeling about something, say maybe we could do something on that becomes part of a discussion, and that might make us think of something else, and it depends on the seed. But if we do get something, for example, when we did Sorry We Missed You, I was kind of we were both fascinated by, how did the 8-hour day from 1984 and that terrible defeat of the miners' strike, what is the consequences? How has that become Ricky, driving a van, thinking he's an entrepreneur of the road, working 12 to 14 hours a day, and we just felt like this fragmentation, this loss of power in your working life, that's something that's been very interesting to us. So again, if I spend research, then I'll say, well, let's think about this. And what really fascinated me was when I went with the drivers, I found them, I drove around with them delivering the parcels. You know, it took a long time to do that because the workforce now is more fragmented. There's not a trade union you can contact. Many of them are not involved in the trade union. So what I'll do is, I'll spend time with these guys. And then I was very interested about the care workers who are looking after our oldest and most vulnerable. You know, so instead of having a proper contract, they'd work 2 hours in the morning, they would work 2 hours in the afternoon, and 2 hours in the evening to put them to bed. But in between time, they're not getting paid. They're sitting at bus stops, they're having a cup of tea in a cafe and all this. How did the world become like that? You know, why are we driving, you know, are these drivers into misery, ill health? I actually met someone, a wife whose husband had died because they kept missing appointments because every time they couldn't, every time you tried to make an appointment and you had to get a replacement driver, they were being fined £150. No wonder Jeff Bezos is the richest, second richest man in the world. You know, so my point is that you get nourished by all this. You meet the people, you see them, you talk to them. And then what I find is that things begin to grow in my mind, connections. You know, this connects up with this. How does that connect up with this? How could we tell a story? So it becomes like you're nourished by the information. The information gives you creative options. So if you listen to people and you've been spend that time with them, things will start happening in your imagination. So what I do then is keep Ken, you know, up to date with what I've seen. I met this great guy here. Let's listen to this story. Look what happened. But what I like to do is put it down on paper, and so try to crystallise the ideas. And then what I find is that characters begin to emerge, and a little voice begins to speak. And then I'll never forget. I was in a cafe in Edinburgh, sitting down, and I remember because I've got to get the name right. I don't know how it is with you when you're writing. If I don't get the name right, I can't get started. And I remember Daniel Blake. I remember he was a guy who was trying to keep his dignity. So it's I, Daniel Blake. And then what happens, they begin to grow in your head. And then I just sort of build it up, build it up, build it up. And then I put something down on paper, you know, with maybe, it may be some scenes, it'll be the premise, it'll be the ideas that we're interested in. So I'm testing it, and, you know, and I really maybe, you know, write that up, but freely, throwing things all together. And Ken trusts me now to know my mind is jumpy, and then we'll talk about it. And I says, does that excite you? You know, and then, you know, then we're both talking, and then if we feel that that is a solid base, you know, what I'll do then is I'll just go away and write the script. And what's beautiful about working with Ken too, I don't feel him sitting on my shoulder. He knows he's so generous to writers, you wouldn't believe it. He's the most, everybody thinks I've got the best agent in the world because it always says in the posters, you know, directed by Ken Loach, written by me. I haven't got an agent. That was Ken who did that from the very beginning. And he says, facing the blank page is the toughest and most creative job and the most important part of a film. You know, and I felt embarrassed by all that, you know, man of his reputation when I first met him. But he says, and he always follows the writers. You know, so he's always had great respect for that. I mean, he's a very super modest man, as Ninos knows and Frank knows. And anyway, so what we do then is I just write the script as quickly as I can and just follow my instinct. You know, you try to be tough, be intellectually rigorous, you try to make it cohesive. But then, you know, once I've got a first draft, I'll show that to Ken. And then what we'll do then is just try and, first of all, it's obviously hand it over the first time because he doesn't know what's coming. He knows the area, but he doesn't know what's coming. So that first phone call was always very key to see how he felt. But fortunately, he's always felt very excited, you know, about the material. And then we meet up, and then we just try to be our own toughest critics. You say, well, you know, it loses pace there, or does that make sense, or could we try something else here? And again, that becomes a very rich discussion, and there's no holes barred, because we've got to be prepared to stab the baby in the heart if it's not working at that stage, because that's the simplest stage to do that. You know, so you have to be your own toughest critics, and we don't show it around to lots of people. You know, we work on it together. You know, and then after that, I'll go and write another draft. And if that feels tighter, we had an old friend, Roger, who's an old friend of Ken. He's a script editor. So he's an outside eye, he knows nothing about it. And And it was always good to get his take on it, to see, did it strike him or did it make sense? And obviously Rebecca will read it by that time. And then what we do then is just keep it very, very close. Then bit by bit, we feel we've got a solid script, and only then do we send it out to all the other people who we try to raise money from, whether it's the BBC or Channel 4 or our friend. And the lovely thing is we've got a circle of, distributors around Europe who give a little bit, which means we put a package, because we give our films very, 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 very modest. But if you do that and they like it, we make the film, and then hopefully they get their money back. And if they get their money back, then hopefully it allowed us to do another script. So it's all quite organic, but we try and keep it tight, keep it close. But it's a very, 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 very tight relationship. I mean, you've got to make that relationship with writer and director has got to work very, very well. Because if you get different values or different ideas about it, it will sink. It will sink. I'm talking about like the deep values. I don't want, if I didn't feel happy writing or Ken didn't feel happy directing, it just wouldn't work. So that's not the discussion. The discussion is technical things about just the shape of the script and whether we've made the right kind of creative choices. So it's very organic, but it's, and then I'm very different from most writers too, because, oftentimes I've met people doing the research that we could have in the film, so I introduce Ken to them. I might know some locations. This is a good place to perhaps do this. So I'm involved with everybody along the whole stage, the locations, the casting director, who does, wonderful friend from Glasgow, Colleen Crawford. And so we all do it together, and then I try to be on set, certainly for the prep, and then the casting, final decisions, we do it together. But I would never interfere with Ken's instincts, but by meeting the people and talking to the people who might be cast, that actually helps you define who the character is. So you might find 2, 3, 4 wonderful actors. Maybe one's got the kind of one element, but not the other. Or maybe someone touches you more than another. Another one might be quicker or more funny. And then you have to, so that helps you define who your character is, so you can give it best flesh and blood. So Ken always wants us to do that together. And then during the shoot, we shoot in sequence, which means that everybody doesn't get the script in a winner. They get the script given to them bit by bit, but we shoot in sequence, so they can almost be in touch with their own sentiment and their own feelings while they're doing it. And then we get to the end of the film, and then we do the editing with the wonderful Jonathan Morris, again, who's had a relationship with Ken for many, many years, longer than me. And we just watch the film together at the end and try to be our toughest critics in an atmosphere of just, kind of, you listen to each other. No big egos, and that's wonderful. So I can't believe my luck really to have met such a wonderful group of filmmakers. So if you are making films and you can find that circle of people with different skills, who share your values and have got that energy and have got the talent to do the different jobs. I mean, it's wonderful if you can build a team like that and get some continuity. The problem is many writers are hired to write a script, as you probably know, hired to write a script, they look at it, they could dump you or they could give it to another writer, and that's the last you hear of it, which is a painful thing if it's something very close to your heart.
Just bring one comment on funny story, how you are connected with Ken Loach. A few years ago, Ken Loach gave a master class 100 meters far from... it's a comment, it's not a question. How you are connected with Ken Loach. Just to tell you that Ken Loach gave a master class a few years ago, 100 meters far from this place in a bookstore. So it's amazing that you are giving now in this cinema the master class. Thank you again.
Άλλη ερώτηση? Ναι.
Yes, about the film, with a very clever scripted finding in The Old Oak, you refer to the labor demands and the protests and the strikes in the 80s and the crushing of the labor movement by Margaret Thatcher. The people that were at their 30s at that time, now they're at the 70s. So what are your thoughts about these people? And to the extent that you can, what are their thoughts? And with that question comes another one. What do you think is the impact on the living standards of the lower and middle classes people because of Brexit? Because we see that also in the movie. Thank you.
Well, it was interesting showing the film. We always show the film to the people who helped us make it. So that was to the Syrians, but also the people who lived in that area. And and we spent a lot of time listening to people in their 70s, or 70s or 80s now, about their lives in 1984. I actually met a wonderful old lady who was in her 90s. And the irony was, she was in better condition than many of the people today in their 30s. Many of the people who had moved in, and she had a real sense of coherence and a hinterland to her. Even how she dressed, she had took real pride in how she was. But these people look back with great sadness because they've seen their communities decimated. There's a lovely woman, Heather Woods, who was actually in the Old Oak, but she's still an activist, and she always will be till the day she dies. She was a kind of a remarkable woman. So I think many of those people, watched the Old Oak with a great degree of sadness about how their communities had ended up like this. Because the 1984 strike, which the miners lost and Margaret Thatcher crushed them, was a real blow to the working class. And because after that, she had passed many anti-trade union laws. She made it more difficult to organise and to be part of a trade union. Tony Blair, New Labour, he was very, very similar. In relation to your other question about Brexit, but there's all sorts of studies that have been done, and it looks like the GDP, or whatever they call it, has been reduced significantly by Brexit. I think Brexit's often misunderstood from outside. I think it was many of these communities, like we saw in the Old Oak, these people voted for Brexit because they wanted to give one in the eye to the political elite. I don't think they necessarily wanted, to span young people in Britain travelling around Europe. I think their own lives, I think it was a failure of the political system in the United Kingdom. When you look at it now, Britain really is falling apart. The National Health Service is falling apart. The court system is falling apart. There's hundreds of thousands of people waiting for trials. There's a housing crisis. There really are big, serious problems. And I think many people in the more marginalised communities have felt furious and angry. And they thought that Brexit, right wing moved in. There's a guy called Farage who moved in. He said, we will control our own destiny, all this bullshit. And a lot of people swallowed it. And now we're realising that, they were telling lies. So there's great frustration. I think there's probably great sadness. And at the moment, Britain is not in a very good place. And of course, what they do is, when they're desperate, let's blame the immigrants. That makes it nice and easy. So what you see is this whole big exaggeration of the small boats coming into Britain, which is nothing compared to, what happens here in Athens or in Greece or Italy, or many of the other countries that receive many more immigrants. But you see the rhetoric pumped up. So Britain at the moment is not in a good place, and unfortunately the Labour Party with Stammer, another useless, apparatchik, unprincipled person. We saw how useless he was recently, with Gaza. Couldn't even, call for a ceasefire. He has not supported trade unions, on strikes.
Who are you referring to?
Chris Stammer, the leader of the Labour Party, who is like one inch of a difference to the Tory party. So the Labour Party won't provide any difference at all. So we're not in a good state there. So activists have to find new ways to organise and new ways to try and encourage themselves, but it's not in a good place.
What we're hearing in the movie, we eat together, we fight together, is it a true story or you made it up?
The line is made up, but not what happened. And no more spoilers.
Thank you very much, Paul and Nino, for bringing us Paul here in Athens. I have two questions. The one question is, since most of the scripts and the movies you have made are based on the struggle of the working class and the struggle of the people for freedom, for rights, what are the limits between in the scriptwriting being a documentary and a drama film, if you see some? And the second question is, I know that you're a friend of Athens, you have been here 10 years ago, and you are always in solidarity with the struggle of people here, I mean the work in ERT, the cleaners. Would you ever be inspired by a story placed in the Greek system, even though most of your films and the struggle of the people of the working class is global? Thank you.
Well, thanks for your very generous question. Going to the first part, I think documentary and film are very, very different. And what we do Ken has done documentaries. I haven't done documentaries, and they're both beautiful mediums. I don't think I would some of the stories that have most touched me in my life have been just wonderful documentaries, but they're very different. And you know, a good issue doesn't make for a good film. Oftentimes there are subjects that are very important to deal with, but in a story or a film, you have to find that magical little connection, that spark, to try and do it in an original way. And that's the beauty of, you know, fiction for me. You're liberated in a way to try and find other contradictions. So they're very different beasts, but they can still serve the same purpose. But again, you know, a good issue doesn't make for a good film. You have to find a great story, and the story has to bring you in. And you know, if people smell rhetorical flourishes or, you know, trying to tell you to think something, people back away from that, and rightly so. I think that films that touch you most are the ones that draw you in, and then you begin to feel yourself in those people's shoes, and then you understand the choices, even if those choices are tragic and something that you probably wouldn't do. That's the beauty about a story. It can draw you in, and you can really be in their shoes. And you can do that. You can do that in documentary as well. But then you have to find the real people to do that. You know, so I think they're very different. Although, you know, they can equally touch you. At least that's my sense. And in relation to trying to doing a film here in Athens or Greece, I mean, you would do it better. You know, because you understand the history, you understand the language. The writer's hero, you should do it. Yeah, and I'm sure you are. You know, but if you understand the history and the poetry and what your granny said and what your mother said and the prejudices of your Uncle Dan, you know, I mean, you have such a rich hinterland. Now, I have done stories in Ireland, but I have more of a connection with that. But I have done stories in Nicaragua. I was there for 2.5 years. We have done stories in Los Angeles, but I spent 3 years with Latinos in Central America. So that kind of gives me a confidence to be with them and have some sense of it. I don't have the same confidence. I don't have the same confidence as I would writing characters from the west coast of Scotland. So I'm absolutely sure there'll be magnificent stories here just now. I've been talking to some activists over here just yesterday. I mean, what's happening to the refugees now is absolutely mind-blowing, literally mind-blowing. I've just come from Serbia, and the cruelty of what's happening from people coming in from Bulgaria into Serbia just now, or people from Croatia into Bosnia just now. I was speaking to activists. I mean, there's stories there all over the place. You know, the level of state cruelty, and I would say state murder, the pushbacks, putting people out into rafts, you know, putting women and children into rafts. I've just been speaking to people just last week in Serbia. This was a guy who was a civil engineer who was fleeing war. You know, they were picked up by the police, phones stolen, everything smashed up, brought into a barracks in Bulgaria, beaten for 3 hours, stripped, and then passed into the night. And that's happening all the time. It's happening before our eyes. It's happening here in the border with Croatia too. I know it's been happening here with the pushbacks in the countryside, because I've spoken to activists yesterday who told me details of the stories. So there's amazing stories to be told here. You know, and that's only just one issue, and I'm sure there's many other. But the people who live here will understand it better, you know, and will do it better, you know. And you have got brilliant filmmakers and writers. So I wouldn't, because I'd be too scared.
Και πάνω εκεί ήθελε να δώσουν ψηλά να πεις.
Hi, thank you so much for being here and for telling us your stories. My question is, you talked about a liberation of writing fiction, and my question is, how liberated do you feel to change the ending of a story that might already happened or that is ongoing, in terms of, I guess, losing a bit of reality, but giving power to working class people, or like in a happier ending, I guess, by giving them some sort of like revenge or power. Thank you.
That's a really good question, and I think you have to be faithful to the premise, to the story, and you have to be faithful to the character. I mean, it depends. I'll try and distinguish. Bread and Roses, for example. That story was a real story. It was inspired by real events, and the cleaners, you know, with great risks to themselves, had a great victory. But there was great consequences for individuals who were sent back to, you know, Central America again. So often a victory is double-edged. You might achieve something, but there's great personal cost to it. And that's my experience of life. You know, it's never all a happy ending. So in that particular story, we had something that was very positive towards the end of Bread and Roses, but the consequences for the protagonist were drastic. So it's very, very mixed. But I think if you have a story where you add on a happy ending, you know, which is not truthful to the narrative, the characters and the premise, you feel cheated. Well, the Greek masters talked about Deus ex machina. No, I think that's the Greek, they used to have the God figure coming in and, you know, solving the problem for them. Deus ex machina. I mean, that doesn't work for modern drama, I don't think, because you feel cheated. It's like winning the lottery at the end of the film, and then you say, give us a break, you know. And people smell for, you know, people smell, you know, when it's sticky or nostalgic or it's two-dimensional, and it kills your whole film, you know. So you've really got to think closely about that. And then sometimes there's a time to tell tragedies. Daniel Blake is a tragic story, but we hopefully for the audience there's a revelation about the cruelty of the state, you know, or sorry we missed you as well. I mean, it's a drastic, tragic ending because this guy is stuck in a wheel that he can't break from, and that's very, very important to tell, and I feel that's truthful. And I think those films worked and had such a big response, and there's community screenings all over the country because people recognised that was their lives and it rang true. So if, but at the same time you have to tell stories that are hopeful, you know. So Bread and Roses was a more hopeful story. Icíar, although it was a comedy, was a more hopeful story, you know. And if you're all just telling tragedies all the time, you'd want to put your head in the oven, you know. But the ending, you've got to earn the ending. That's really, really important. And if the ending is not earned, it'll destroy your whole film, you know. So there's big, big questions. And in this particular film, the Old Oak, Ken and myself had very, very long, detailed discussions about whether we earned the ending, and I won't say how it went, you know, but it's the biggest question. Really good question.
Να δώσουμε ότι από εδώ κάποιοι θέλουν να δώσει ένα ερώτημα. Δυστυχώς η τελευταία ερώτηση αυτή, γιατί μετά έχει να δώσει και 6 συνεντεύξεις και να μην τον παρακουράσουμε. Και μετά θα έρθει το βράδυ να παρακολουθήσει την ταινία και να κάνει και ένα στο τέλος εκεί Q&A. Γι' αυτό this is the last question. And you have about 6 interviews afterwards. So.
Hello, and thank you for being here. Hi. So my question is a little bit more technical because you discussed about you're shooting the film on a sequence.
Yes.
Would you kindly elaborate a little bit more on that, how you organize that? Because do the actors read the whole script, and how do you go about it? Because it's a quite novel way of approaching filming. Thank you.
Well, what happened was Ken many years ago, he used to work with the BBC, and what people would do is do a read-through. And then what he noticed was, they do the first read-through, and it's often fresh and got energy, and they'd practice it and practice it and practice it, and then suddenly the life seemed to go out of it. That was his experience. And I don't think, that was Ken's experience. So what he decided to do was just to shoot in sequence. So if you have, for example, like what would happen in most film shoots, if you've got a family dynamics, and there's, what do you call it, there's 5 scenes in that house, what a conventional setup would do is they'd hire the house for 1 week, and then you'd shoot the 5 scenes, and then you get rid of the house. So it's not an expense. We don't. So we'll have, if there's 5 scenes there, we'll go back to that house throughout the 6-week shoot. We always keep it quite short, 6 weeks. So, but what we do is very simply, literally, we give most of the actors, give them the first couple of scenes of what they need to know to do that scene. So they have the scenes and they learn the lines and they do it, but what they don't know is what's going to happen next. And so they kind of live it. Or sometimes, Ken, if he's play surprises, other people will know the scene, but other people, the person who is surprised, it won't know. So when the information is given, it really is a surprise to them. And what usually happens is it goes back again to being very close to the script. So it's quite simple really, but what it means is all the locations really have to be under our control for the full 6 weeks, or until we've finished the last scene in that location. And then sometimes occasionally there's been actors who are happy to read the whole script, because they feel they can work with the arc and they want to see whether they want to do it. But generally speaking, that's how it's worked. Or if there's a big debate scene, like we had a big debate scene in Window Shakes the Barley, which is much more complex, people will get that in plenty of time so that they can read it. There's a very simple scene, they'll maybe get it a day or 2 before. So it's quite organic really. But Icíar Bollaín, she doesn't work that way. And I think she gets equally good performances. So there's no one way to do it, but that's the way Ken works.
Okay. Thank you all. I can thank our guests.
Thanks for coming, and good luck to all the filmmakers out there. Yeah, good luck.